Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. This is our second session of Share Your Poems, so read your poems. This format is very simple. We'll start with the featured poem that everybody knows beforehand what it is going to be, so they would have time to go through it, think about it. So Marissa is going to be reading the featured poem and then talking about what she gets from it. Then everybody is invited to share their favorite poem, read it out, and then talk for 2 to 3 minutes on what you find interesting about it. What do you like about it? You don't need to share your poem, but you're welcome to share. All right, so so that's the plan. And then we go into the breakout rooms so that we can talk about the poems that have been read. And then when we come back, we talk about, each of us talks about what poems or poems really struck a chord for us and why. All right, so that's the format. So with that, let me hand it over to Marissa. Marissa.
Good evening to all. So today I'm reading for you a poem by Juan Ramon Jimenez. So I have been thinking for the last couple months, I've been very focused on this concept of I and how we can, consider I in addition to community and culture. So that's why this poem came out to me. I would like to let you know this poem is originally written in Spanish and it is translated to English. So another reason I'm reading this poem, because there is a special request out there for me to read a poem in Spanish. So I'm going to do 2 birds, 1 stone here. First, though, I will read it to you guys in English. I am not I. I am not I. I am this one, walking beside me, whom I do not see, whom at times I manage to visit, and whom at other times I forget, who remains calm and silent while I talk, and forgives gently when I hate, who walks where I am not, who will remain standing when I die. Yo no soy yo, soy este, que va a mi lado sin yo verlo, que a veces voy a ver y que a veces olvido. El que calla, sereno cuando hablo, el que perdona, dulce cuando odio, el que pasea por donde no estoy, el que quedará en pie cuando yo muera. Sometimes I have found myself looking in the mirror and wondering who it was who was staring back at me. And when I'm doing that, I recall this poem. I imagine that all of us at some point in our lives just can't help but wonder who we are, right? Who's that person deep within us? What do we look like to others? And so that's what I see here. And I also see sometimes a reproach for where you're feeling that the I that you believe to be your true self, somehow you're failing being that I when you feel that others don't see you. And so that's what comes to mind for this poem. Thank you.
Thank you, Marissa. Next up is going to be Avi, Joe, Mike, and Allison. Avi, go ahead. Oh, just a second. I need to unmute everybody. Go ahead, Avi.
Hey, so this is a poem. It's actually not written by a famous poet. It's written by a friend of mine, but he sent it to me and it really struck a chord. So it became my favorite poem. All right. This is the life of Nilo. No senses to his name. A 0 bandwidth creature. He's dumb, deaf, mute, and lame. He can't see or feel a thing, nor taste, nor smell, nor hear. He has no way of knowing if he is even there. He would think, but knows no words, nor colors, shapes, or lines. Doesn't know how old he is. He cannot tell the time. Nilo is a floating soul. He swims in nothing stew. His life is only Nilo, unlike for me and you. Nilo is a lucky man. I wish I was so free. While we hurry to and fro, he gets to sit and be.
Wonderful, thank you. Would you
Yeah.
like to talk a couple of minutes about what you like about it?
Yeah, well, this poem means a lot to me because I know this friend personally, and he went through some hard things. Was a heavy alcoholic at one point, and he talked over a lot of like sort of depressing thoughts that he'd had. But he told me that this poem sort of encapsulated that feeling of just wanting to exist, and that's like, he said that was like a revitalizing thing for him, and I understand, and I'm able to almost live in his shoes through this poem and understand his desire to live, and it's inspiring.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Avi. Really appreciate it. And welcome. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Mike. Joe.
So I'll read I Too by Langston Hughes. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes, but I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody will dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I too am America. And it's an interesting poem because I've had actually two different coworkers that we've had discussions about this on different occasions. One of my coworkers used to keep it on their desk. And the thing that actually we talked about, and they happen to be Black, but the thing we talked about is that just what it's like to be treated differently sometimes. And it gave me and it didn't matter. We didn't necessarily relegate it to race, just differently in general, what it was like to be treated and looked at a little bit differently. So I got a deeper insight into that. But then we had a much deeper conversation about the value, and I let him meet up on this topic at one point, the value of shame and what that actually is. Because so many times we're taught not to feel shame, not to feel any shame for what we do or who we are and just things like that. But it's doing a disservice for everyone, because shame is actually something that is an instinct. It's the way you react to something, and you're reacting, and that could actually catapult you into changing into a better human being. So that if you do something, and this is the value of shame, is that it really does allow you to say to yourself, why is this bothering me? And should I be doing something differently? Even though the rest of the world's telling me something is instructing me a different way. And we kind of talked about this with instinctual behavior yesterday with transcendentalism. What is this thing that is inside of me that is causing me to repulse, to behave in certain ways? And it allows us, it's our instinctual internal compass and Kant actually writes quite a bit about the value of shame, as far as how it can essentially allow you to behave like a moral exemplar in certain cases, that it allows you to not necessarily listen to conventional wisdom and do the right thing. So we had a very, very a good conversation about shame more than anything else, rather than just race. But anyway, that was one of the poems.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Mike, followed by Allison. Mike, go ahead.
I chose a poem by William Blake called Holy Thursday. 'Twas on a holy Thursday, their innocent faces clean, the children walking two and two in red and blue and green. Gray-headed beetles walked before with wands as white as snow, till into the high dome of Paul's they like Thames waters flow. Oh, what a multitude they seem, these flowers of London town. Seated in companies they sit with radiance all their own. The hum of multitudes was there, but multitudes of lambs. Thousands of little boys and girls raising their innocent hands. Now like a mighty wind they raise to heaven the voice of song, or like harmonious thunderings the seats of heaven among. Beneath them sit the aged men, wise guardians of the poor. Then cherish pity, lest you drive an angel from your door. I chose the poem because when I read Maritza's, I somehow found the person that was walking aside in the poem that she read. I found it to be almost godlike, especially in the last line when it says, who walks where I am not, who will remain standing when I die. So I almost felt like it was somebody or something that was there before I was alive and will be there after. So it kind of led me down a religious tract in this poem. From what I took from it was, I believe for Holy Thursday, Ascension of Christ, they had taken the orphans from the town in London and brought them to church, and they're all cleaned up and they're there. And as the procession is going on, they're raising their hands, and the author makes it clear that the children have a radiance about them, that there is something, and even places them higher than the old wise guardians of the church. So the children, because of their innocence, are just naturally higher. And I guess you could assume closer to God. And I thought it was also fitting in regards to what's happening around the world, especially in Ukraine today, just seeing photos of how the children are affected from what's going on there. And of course, in other parts of the world. So it just struck me as a very good fit for the time. The religious feel from Maritza's poem that led me to this, and then encompassing the children of the world today.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Next up is going to be Allison, followed by Rose. Folks, go ahead and type a exclamation mark if you would like to share one of your favorite poems. Allison.
This poem is Elmira by Pablo Neruda. A bowl for the bishop, a crushed and bitter bowl, a bowl with remnants of iron and ashes with tears, a sunken bowl with sobs and fallen walls, a bowl for the bishop, a bowl of Elmira blood, a bowl for the banker, a bowl with cheeks of children from the happy South, a bowl with explosions, with wild waters and ruins and fright, a bowl with split axles and trampled heads, a black bowl, a bowl of Elmira blood. Each morning, each turbid morning of your lives, you will have it steaming and burning at your tables. You will push it aside a bit with your soft hands, so as not to see it, so as not to digest it so many times. You will push it aside with a bit with the bread and the grapes, this bowl of silent blood that will be there each morning, a bowl for the colonel and the colonel's wife, at a garrison party, at each party, above the oaths and the spittle, with the wine light of early morning, so that you may see it trembling and cold upon the world. Yes, a bowl for all of you, rich men here and there, monstrous ambassadors, ministers, table companions, ladies with cozy tea parties and chairs, a bowl shattered, overflowing, dirty with the blood of the poor, for each morning, for each week, forever and ever, a bowl of Elmira blood facing you forever. So this was written about the Spanish Civil War, but I feel like it's really a poem that it can be any war, any time, but also it's really about how people should face what they've done, whether it's war or it's any bad thing that somebody has done. And it's not really asking for revenge. It's just asking someone to face up to it and look at what they've done. And it seemed very appropriate for this time, especially this week.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Allison. Next up is Rose, followed by Brian. Rose.
Thank you. My poem is called I Shall Not Live in Vain by Emily Dickinson. If I can stop one heart from breaking, I shall not live in vain. If I can ease one life the aching, or cool one pain, or help one fainting robin onto his nest again, I shall not live in vain. This is one of my favorite poems of all time. It's very simple and short, and yet cuts to the heart of why we're really here, what gives meaning to our lives. And basically what it teaches is empathy, showing compassion, even to a robin, even to any helpless creature that cannot reciprocate the kindness. But just what actually gives life meaning is our capacity to love and give love, compassionate love and empathetic love without any expectations or attaching any conditions on such a manner. I think this is something that, we need more of in the world, and that it's something I'm cultivating in my life at the moment. This is a poem that I have framed in my room, and it's something that it just reminds me to treat others with kindness in every encounter that I have. So thank you.
Rose, that was beautiful. That was amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I like not just poem, but the way you read it and everything that you said about it. And welcome to our meetups.
Thank you.
Next up is going to be Brian.
Okay. I hope this isn't too long. It's a few verses, but I'll try and read it faster to make it easier. It's called The Dew of the Dead. It's by Thackeray. I sit beside my peaceful hearth with curtains drawn and lamp trimmed bright. I watch my children's noisy mirth. I drink in home and its delight. I sip my tea and criticize the war from flying rumors caught. Trace on the map to curious eyes how here they marched and there they fought. In intervals of household chat, I lay down strategic laws. Why this maneuver and why that? Shape the event or show the cause. Or in smooth dinner table phrase, twixt soup and fish, discuss the fight. Give to each chief his blame or praise. Say who was wrong and who was right. Meanwhile, o'er Alma's bloody plain, the scathe of battle has rolled by. The wounded writhe and groan, the slain lie naked, staring to the sky. The outworn surgeon plies his knife, nor pauses with the closing day, while those who have escaped with life find food and fuel as they may. And when their eyes and sleep they close, after scant rations duly shared, plague picks his victims out from those whom chance of battle may have spared. Still when the bugle sounds the march, he tracks his prey through step and dell, hangs fruits to tempt the throats that parch, and poisons every stream and well. All this with gallant hearts is done, all this with patient hearts is borne, and they by whom the laurels won are seldom they by whom 'tis worn. No deed, no suffering of the war, but wins us fame or spares us ill. Those noble swords, though drawn afar, are guiding English homesteads still. Owe we a debt to those brave men, unpaid by aught that's said or sung, by leaders from a steady pen or phrases from a flippant tongue. The living England hands may crown with recognition frank and free, with titles, medals, and renown. The wounded shall our pensions be. But they who meet a soldier's doom, think you it is enough, good friend, to plant the laurel at their tomb and carve their names, and there an end? No, they are gone, but there are left those who loved best while they were here. Parents made childless, babes bereft, desolate widows, sisters dear. All these let grateful England take, and with a large and liberal heart, cherish for her slain soldiers' sake, and of her fullness give them part. Fold them within her sheltering breast, their parent, husband, brother prove, so that the dead may be at rest, knowing those cared for whom they love. I chose it was a little bit long. I chose some others, but I decided on this one because I mean, as like probably everyone else, I've been watching the news broadcasts from the war in Ukraine. This is about another war in Crimea. So it's in the same part of the country, different actors, but same part of the world. And it just touched me. Thackeray doesn't often touch me, but this one does.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Next up is Margarita.
Oh, hi. I tried to type down, paste the text in the chat box if in case by mispronouncing it. This is a poem by E. Cummings. I think I mentioned this. This is one of my favorite poems. So, Maggie and Millie and Molly and May by E. Cummings. Maggie and Millie and Molly and May went down to the beach to play one day. And Maggie discovered a shell that can sing so sweetly. She couldn't remember her troubles. And Millie befriended a stranded star whose ray 5 languid fingers were. And Molly was chased by a horrible thing which raced sideways while blowing bubbles. And May come home with a smooth round stone, as small as a world and as large as a loan. For whatever we lose, like a you or a me, it's always ourself we find in the sea. So I like this because even though it's in the form of like child's story, it's actually really deep for me. It's about self-identity, search of self-identity, regardless the experiences we have in our life, like when we have pleasure, good times, like in the beach, listening to good music, but also in times where we feel lonely, stranded like this, the stars, sea stars, and also when we deal with problems, horrible problems in our life. But that is exactly the times where we can find ourselves growing to be what we are right now. And it is always ourselves we find every time we see things and what we experience in things. Yeah, that's why I like this. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Margarita. Next up is Jeff.
So this is poetry, but it is a small portion of a very famous speech that I know you all know. And of course, it's all about this week as well. And so I wasn't sure about it, but Brian, thank you for reading what you read. And it's perhaps Winston Churchill's most famous speech. It was not an address given live to the nation, but just to the Commons, with only the members of Parliament and staff able to hear it. But there is no doubt that it will be remembered as one of the most powerful political oratories of all time. So here's a part of it. The British Empire and the French Republic, linked together in their cause and in their need, will defend to the death their native soil, aiding each other like good comrades to the utmost of their strength. We shall not flag or fail. We shall go on to the end. We shall fight in France. We shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds. We shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender, and even if, which I do not for a moment believe, this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving, then our empire beyond the seas, armed and guarded by the British fleet, would carry on the struggle until, in God's good time, the new world, with all its power and might, steps forth to the rescue and the liberation of the old. June 4th, 1940. I think that speech was one of the most powerful speeches in a wartime setting in human history. And it definitely had an impact, I think, on the British people and on the world. If you ever get a chance to see the movie on Churchill, where with Gary Oldfield in it, it's a very moving moment.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jeff. Folks, if anybody else wants to read, they're welcome to do that. I'm setting up the breakout rooms. So they will be facilitated by, let's see, Allison and Marissa. Marissa, do you have anything to say before we go? Oh, just a second. We've got one more. Steve, go ahead.
A friend sent me this poem last week, and I saw the title. It was called The Invitation. And I thought it was the Mary Oliver poem. And, oh, I've read that poem 20 times. It's like, that's gonna, not interest me. But I was surprised. This is by Oriah Mountain Dreamer. It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for. And if you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing, it doesn't interest me how old you are. I want to know if you will risk looking like a fool for love, for your dreams, for the adventure of being alive. It doesn't interest me what planets are squaring your moon. I want to know if you have touched the center of your own sorrow, if you have been opened by life's betrayals, or have been shriveled and closed from fear of further pain. I want to know if you can sit with pain, mine or your own, without moving to hide it, or fade it, or fix it. I want to know if you can be with joy, mine or your own, if you can dance with wildness and let the ecstasy fill you to the tips of your fingers and toes, without cautioning us to be careful, be realistic, remember the limitations of being human. It doesn't interest me if the story you are telling is true. I want to know if you can disappoint another to be true to yourself. If you can bear the accusation of betrayal and not betray your own soul. If you can be faithless and therefore trustworthy. I want to know if you can see beauty even when it is not pretty every day. And if you can source your own life from its presence. I want to know if you can live with failure, yours and mine, and still stand at the edge of the lake and shout to the silver of the full moon, yes. And it doesn't interest me where you live or how much money you have. I want to know if you can get up after the night of grief and despair, weary and bruised to the bone, and do what needs to be done to feed the children. It doesn't interest me who you know or how you came to be here. I want to know if you will stand in the center of the fire with me and not shrink back. It doesn't interest me where or what or with whom you have studied. I want to know what sustains you from the inside when all else falls away. I want to know if you can be alone with yourself and if you truly like the company you keep in each empty moment. Talks about what's truly important in life. And it was very powerful and very inspirational to me.
Wonderful. That was amazing poem. Thank you. Next up is going to be Jyoti.
Oh, just give me a minute.
Sure.
So I'm going to read something that's closer to nature and a little bit perhaps on the lighter side. However, I think just as profound, because, nature has lots to teach us. It's called Song for Autumn. Don't you imagine the leaves dream now how comfortable it will be to touch the earth instead of the nothingness of the air and the endless freshets of wind? And don't you think the trees, especially those with mossy hollows, are beginning to look for the birds that will come, 6 a dozen, to sleep inside their bodies? And don't you hear the goldenrod whispering goodbye, the everlasting being crowned with the first tuffets of snow? The pond stiffens, and the white field over which the fox runs so quickly brings out its long blue shadows. The wind wags its many tails, and in the evening, the piled firewood shifts a little, longing to be on its way.
Would you like to speak about it?
I wouldn't classify it as one of my most favorite poems. I read poetry a lot, and I write poetry too. There was just with what's going on in the world, I felt really grounded by this poem. In autumn, everything falls to the earth and turns into soil that we all rely on. We always, whenever we make the next step, we assume that there's earth next to us. And just the description of the tree and just all those aspects of being supported. The tree is going to support the birds are the snow and the pond, everybody's supporting each other. And it's written in such a beautiful, lyrical way. And I hope, poetry can make some difference in this world.
Wonderful. Thank you. Let me ask Paul, you've just come in. What poem do you have to share? And let's go with Marissa. But Paul, you've come in, so we would love for you to share a poem. Marissa, go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Sorry I couldn't get on till now. Well, you're putting me on the spot, Shrikant, but I've decided. No,
take your time.
No, I will share a poem I wrote because it was in my mind to do it, so I'm going to do it. But I apologize because I don't even know the theme today. What is the theme today?
Theme today is everybody gets to read the poem that they like. And I hope you like the poem that you read, that you wrote. So please do. Okay, yeah, I do. So it falls in that category. Okay, I'm going to pull it up here. Here it is. The soul can be found in a candy wrapper. Did I read this last week, Shrikant? Nope. Okay, good. The soul can be found in a candy wrapper or hidden in plain sight in a box of Cheerios. The prize that you thought was plain and boring because it is in every box. You were hoping to find the bonus prize, the special bright red plastic molded letters, the stylish script capital C and curly angled H with the bags of gold inside the 2 O's that say, woo, woo, you win the trip to Disneyland. Or no, that was me who wanted that, but I pretended that I didn't.
I keep looking for the ones who see through me to the places I can't see myself. I can't see my back, for instance. Maybe the soul is there. The soul can be found in a neural network, an extracted model of my brain. Nobody thinks it is in my heart anymore. Nope, and it's not in one special spot above my left ear. Wait, the Hubble spotted it, making a break for the stars. But it snapped back into the container. Or at least I think so. I only feel it when I'm asleep or when somebody reads a poem. Last night it woke me 3 times. It was hungry, I guess, and mad. It was crying like a baby would cry if it were hungry, and all it was ever fed was cardboard. It feels quiet again today. It doesn't exist. All I need to do is let it know I hear it anyway. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Next up is Marissa.
Wow. I was going to read another poem by Jimenez, Something So Close, but I think that I am going to go in a different direction. And I think I may read to you guys one of my poems.
Beautiful. Wonderful.
This poem is, I wrote it a little bit ago, and it's called Tears for Freedom Lost. Chaos, full of turmoil and brimming with tears, tears that fall for the rejection of the living, living I desperately want, but this is not the way. Way deep down, my soul aches with lasting regret, regret that I yearn to live, and yet I am smothered, smothered with ignorant words and racist thoughts. Thoughts are perceptions fashioned into weapons, weapons you level at me when all I seek is life, life, love, friends, and community on this earth. Earth is grounding, simple, spiritual, blind. Blind exists not in the world of politics. Politics create the chaos that reduces me to tears. Tears I cry for those persecuted just for living, living in a country that denies them their way. Way too late for politics to show regret. Regret for how we who differ they've smothered, smothered our community and fractured our thoughts. Thoughts never were voiced, certain they'll be weapons. Weapons the privileged man uses to drain our life. Life we still want, despite how you taint our earth. Earth we revere as community that is colorblind. Blind are those who brand us with their politics. Politics force a rising war cry laced with tears. Tears are the embers of true freedom, ushered in with chaos.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marissa. Really, this is amazing. Paul has started a great trend here. Thank you. Thank you. Really appreciate that. Thank you. All right. So now let us go into breakout rooms for about 20 minutes. And when we come back, we can either, you have 2 choices and you can use both of them if you want. One is that you can talk about a poem that really spoke to you or poems that spoke to you today. Second, you can also answer the question, why poetry? What does poetry do for you? Okay, so you can choose either of them or both of them. Starting the breakout rooms now. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. All right, folks. So the question now on the table is, what is it that stood out for you from any of the poems that you heard? That's number 1. Second question is, why poetry? What does poetry do for you? You can talk about either one of them or both of them, whatever you prefer. Between 2 to 3 minutes, let's get our thoughts on the table, and then we'll have a discussion. Go right ahead. Type an exclamation mark if you'd like to share. Okay, we'll start with Steve.
Well, I would like to have a discussion between what is the difference between song lyrics and poetry.
Maybe we can do that another time, but you can go ahead. You can say your piece if you want. You got 2 to 3 minutes.
Well, it's been a different experience for me as far as writing poetry. I have always wanted to write song lyrics, but I just can't. And I just can, communicate my thoughts and feelings through poetry that almost come through me. And it's like, just writing the words down like dictation. And it is very cathartic. It gets the feelings and emotions on the page. To me, it's like, a small journal writing. I like to just express myself. I wish I could write a short story or a novel, but I'm just more of a sprinter than a marathon runner. And, that's my form of expression.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Really appreciate that. Next up is Joe, followed by Margarita. Joe.
Can you repeat the first, when I come back in, it like freezes.
Sure.
So what the first question was?
There are, you can,
I got the
there are
second
two
one.
questions. Yeah. So first one is, are there any poems that really spoke to you? If you'd like to talk about that. Alternatively, you can talk about what poetry does for you, or you can talk about both.
Yeah, obviously, I think there's one of the themes we're addressing what was going on in the Ukraine. You can speak to Brian, Jeff, and Allison's poems all spoke very, very nicely to that. I really felt like Jeff's was very inspirational, and it really brought home this feeling of kind of like, well, people can rally in desperate times, so not to give up hope. And Allison, as I'd made some comments that I'm pretty familiar with the Spanish Civil War, so her poem resonated with me as well, for different reasons, but Brian as well. Why poetry is actually an interesting question. Is that I think that I like what Steve shared when he said it was like journaling in a way, and you're putting your thoughts down in a succinct manner where you're capturing how you feel for a moment. But I also think there's a communal aspect to this, and we talked about this a little bit in our breakout room, in the sense that look at how it's brought us together here, in a sense that we're all talking about somebody else's poems, somebody else's experiences, and then our experiences with those poems themselves. And they can basically, I feel like, you kind of invoke a certain emotion that allows us to express ourselves in a more meaningful way. There's also a creative aspect to this too. How, when you're going to communicate to someone else what you're going to write, how's it going to be received? And you're also putting yourself out there, but you're also trying to communicate an idea. So it's kind of there's this creative part to it, I think, as well. I mean, and I do think it's mostly internal, that you're not really worried about what other people are thinking so much, but you still want people to understand what you're trying to say. So there's that aspect of it as well. And then there's just there's a linguistic part of this as well. Just a linguistic awareness that comes along with poetry, that is very helpful. So anyway.
Wonderful. I want to take the opportunity of Steve bringing up writing of poetry and Paul and Marissa reciting their own poetry to kind of broaden the second question. If you write poetry, because I found that kind of consuming of art and production of art is different. I think you really understand the art if you're producing the art at a completely different level. I found that to be, I don't write poetry, but I do sing and I do a little bit of drawing. So any thoughts from people who, if you write poetry, if you could talk, you can take as much as 5 minutes if you would like, and talk about what that is like, because I think we will, I think all of us will learn from that. Next up is going to be Margarita, followed by Marissa and Paul. Margarita.
Yes, we also talk about this in our group. So there are 2 points I want to make. One is, I think listening to all poems, we will see pieces of ourselves, just like Marissa said. So just also like in this E.E. Cummings poem that I read, after coming to the beach, you may return to go home with small pebbles. That is you find yourself. Including reading each poem, we will see pieces of ourselves there. That's what probably will make us feel like connected to certain poems, but not so much to the other, because the poem that you see yourself more, probably you will have that sense of connectedness. And other than that, the second point, I think poem or lyrics from a song, they also have this similar, including all kinds of arts. Jyoti also mentioned this. They can transform energy and transfer energy. For example, when we see something, we listen something, we read a beautiful poem, it moves us. It becomes the exercise of feeling, of emotion, that you feel it not just in your heart, but also in your body, that makes you want to create something. For example, if you learn something really move you, it's not just intellectually, but something move your body that you want to express that, pour that into writing or into poem, for example. And you cannot stop until you pour that energy. I also write poems sometimes, but the thing is, sometimes I do this not consciously, but just when I have time, when I have enough time. That is something that I need to be conscious about, because if poem, like many kinds of arts, can create energy, I need to be more conscious accessing this, because this can be a source of energy as well. Yeah, that's for me. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Margarita. Wonderful. Next up is Marissa.
I want to, with your leave, I'd like to cheat a little bit.
Please.
So Steve read for us the invitation, and back in May of last year, you did a discussion on our favorite books, and I actually brought that poem, and it's actually a book, and I read it, but I wrote a write-up for why I was present in that one, because that's a poem that I find it incapable to have comprehensive thought after reading it. So in preparation, I wrote it down. So if I may, I'd like to reread it here.
Please.
The invitation is a declaration of intent, a map into the longing of the soul, the desire to live passionately, face to face with ourselves and skin to skin with the world around us, settling for nothing less than what is real. I make myself vulnerable to you all here today in sharing this poem. This poem makes me breathless with a desire to live up to its potential. And if I were a bird, this would be my mating call. And this is a poem. This book builds upon the poem. This invitation is to show up in the universe. This invitation will make you pensive about the deep longing for human connection on the most profound levels. Through sharing her own struggles and heartbreaks, Oriah inspires you to experience and embrace life fully, to not avoid or squelch your fears and insecurities, but to instead sit and learn from them. She urges you to find and walk with others willing to do the same. Without calling upon it specifically, Oriah invokes the Tao. She invites us to balance our masculine and feminine energies in order to enter into harmony and oneness with the natural order of the universe, of eternity, so that we may truly benefit from the empty moments without the experience of loneliness. And then I have a little quote that's from Oriah herself. And she says, my invitation, my challenge to you here is to journey into a deeper intimacy with the world and your life without any promise of safety or guarantee of reward beyond the intrinsic value of full participation. And to me, this is also the best way to describe what poetry does for me. It's an outlet of creativity in a world where, for the most part, I prefer my interaction with it to be more rational. And I think that I feel comfortable saying that because I do have, the private world of poetry for me. I have written poetry as long as I could pick up a pencil, but I'm only more recently comfortable sharing that with others. I tend to treat it very much like a dirty little secret. In the past, I was very, I was like, no, I'm this serious math person. Let's not share with them yet, just yet, that you also write poetry. They may think less of you. I don't quite feel that way anymore, but that's kind of the way I treated my relationship with poetry. A lot of the poems I wrote them and then threw them away. I couldn't bear the thought of somebody else seeing them. I don't do that anymore, but it's cathartic in a way to sometimes write some things. And, as I mentioned in the breakout room, for me, I find there's two ways in which I write poetry. Sometimes it's just this non-thinking process where it just has to flow onto the page. And then you'll look at it later and decide if anything needs changed. And then other times it's more of a soothing thought experiment where I set up the structure prior to writing the actual poem. And because I really like to play with all of the different parameters and pentameters and rhyme schemes and whether or not I want it to rhyme. So those are the two ways in which I write. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Marissa. And Marissa, we are running these Monday meetups together. So anytime you can think of something that we can do better, please speak up and let's go ahead and keep, because I think you got a very good sense of running meetups. And so any feedback, and poetry much, much better than I do. So if there is any potentiality that you see, because what is happening is that this is very special, of people sharing poetry in this way. I think this is really a great medium. Jyoti was making that point last time, that this is a great medium. Zoom is a great medium.
I have an idea.
Yes, please.
I think maybe we'll do one or two more of these first, maybe after we've been doing a couple more. But I thought something I think would be lovely is when we go to the breakout rooms, send us to the breakout room with a prompt, and those 5 or 6 people in the breakout room create a poem. Everybody provide a line. Okay. And then we read it out at the end.
Yeah, so think of any wild things, and folks, that applies to other people too. Give us ideas. What we are doing is that we have a scribal hyper book where we are putting all of this thing together. Okay, the idea there is that we kind of combine what we are doing live with the written material and kind of go back. So let me see if Joe is around. Joe, if you could put a link to this scribal hyper book for poetry in the chat, would appreciate that. So that's where you can leave the comments if you want. If you have, at the end of this meetup, we'll always, I'm going to ask for ideas. Now, I will not, the thing is that we have done 800 meetups. So like I have done so many mistakes on so many things. I have a little bit of experience of what doesn't work. So don't be offended if I don't think it's going to work. Okay. but please let me know what you think. And if it looks like it's a potential thing, I will definitely go for it. All right. So thank you, Marissa. Next up is Paul. Paul, why do you write poetry, and what does it do for you?
This is, wow, Shrikant. Well, you know, what everyone does in your meetups has some similarities to poetry and why I write poetry. And what I'm getting at is going back to sort of the cognitive and the theory side of things. I'm sure many of you have heard of something called the theory of mind, which is really just a fancy way of saying it's really hard to know from a person's behavior, like you can't really get in their head and think exactly what they're thinking. Like it's actually impossible. So we all have this thing called empathy where we say but that's related to this because we all want to both get out what really we are and we want to get into what everyone else is and understand it. And when we're in these meetups, you have to, in a little compressed period of time, because Shrikant runs them very well, you have to like express yourself completely in a few sentences, and then you're watching everyone else trying to do it. But that's kind of what poetry is in a way. And I want to respond a little bit to what Steve said about songwriting. I came at this first from songwriting, because that's what I am first, actually. But there's a big difference there. And I love this documentary by this guy, Nick Cave. I don't like him so much. I'm not endorsing his music, but the documentary about his creative process, Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, it's incredible. And in that documentary, he says something that's better than I would say it. He says, when a concept for a song, you're just like sort of playing around in your guitar and something happens and something comes out, and he calls it like a wild animal. And it's at its most exciting when it's completely untamed. It's like a raw idea. And then you start to do, we're going to do some rhyming. We're going to put it into a structure. We're going to create a chorus. And you tame the damn thing, often until it's ruined. Excuse my, but I just mean, it's sort of a frustrating process because you're trying to make it accessible to other people. So in its wild form, it sometimes is a little hard for it to be accessible. So you do a sonnet form, or you do a villanelle or whatever, or you make a haiku, because people know 5 + 7. But sometimes that's a process where you go the opposite of the way Marissa talked about, where she starts with the form, and you have to mold it into that. But all of that I love. And it's like trying to express something about myself that cannot be expressed, and it's just wildly emerges in some odd form, like listening to other people do that, and then listening to them talk about how it feels when they hear that. That's like getting at who we really are. So that's my best shot, Shrikant.
Wonderful, wonderful. I want to bring in the meetup that we just finished, and that was on John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word. And words are very powerful. There are two meanings of word. Word is a notion that you have in the mind, and then word which is spoken out. And when it is spoken out, it produces notion in the other people's mind or your own mind. So it is a way of going from internal to external, back into internal. So it is that loop of creating that loop, which is producing, which actually builds on itself, actually, if you do it right. So it's very interesting. It's the internal and external, and the power of it's what is going on inside you. You are expressing in something that is outside, and that is going to have tremendous power of doing things internally to yourself and to other people. So wonderful. Next up is DLJ, Jyoti, Brian, Steve, Jeff, and Evanique. DLJ, please take your time. Go ahead.
I was going to be succinct. All right then.
No, please be succinct. You're always
So-
succinct, DLJ. Go ahead.
So I'm reminded of, I can't remember who said it, but some parliamentarian stood up and said, everything has been said, but not everyone's had a chance to say it yet. So you asked the question about Shukran, production of. So two parts, there's two parts to it. And Marissa pretty much covered the first one, and Paul pretty much covered the second one. The first is catharsis, so it's certainly for me. So it's something you've got to get out, right? And you could stop there, right? You could just at that point say, right, I've written a poem for myself. The second part, I mean, that could be painful, actually, the first part, right? So releasing something from inside, right? As you just said, inside to outside. The second part is the external part and is more painful, usually, because it's the polishing or the depersonalization process, whereby you might get, well, in my case, I was lucky enough to find somebody who wrote similar style to me nearly 20 years ago. So he read my stuff, I read his stuff, and then we criticize each other, and that is, ouch, pretty painful stuff. But it's the polishing and say, well, why did you use that word? Why not go? And you think, well, okay, that works, right? But at some point, the poem is less you, right? It becomes the ownership of the reader. So this is the consumption versus the production part, right? So that polishing and depersonalization process is quite painful. So odd thing that's happened over the years is that my poetry partner, we don't actually send much to each other anymore, because I have a Harold in my head as I'm writing the first bit that says, what's Harold going? And he likewise has a DLJ in his head. So we actually polish it as we write it almost. Right? There's obviously third stages, whether you want to be published or not, but that's almost irrelevant, right? It's essentially, yeah, first stage catharsis. Second one is that painful polishing process. And when back home, when I was back home, some youngsters from the Malaysia University discovered I was into the poetry thing. Oh, I'm a poet. So they send stuff to me, right? And the first question I'd have to always ask is, do you want encouragement or do you want criticism? So if it's just about, oh yeah, that's good, right? I will just say, okay, nice one, right? But if they actually want criticism, I'm going to then say, this is going to be painful. Are you ready for this, right? And then at some point, quite often, they would just go quiet. It's like, oh, that was too much. That was too much. But yeah, so once you've got something out there, then it's less you, and that's quite painful when you've got somebody else reading it. I wrote 2 last year. This is going to get sad for a second, but you said I could speak. So I wrote 2 poems last year for not happy circumstances. My brother and sister commissioned me to write poems for my parents' funerals, which were both last year. So they were part eulogy, part poem. And because I was in Australia and not UK, I could only watch it via Zoom, and my brother was reading it out. So I had all this weird emotion of my own stuff being read out, right? But also because it was a combination of their thoughts as well as mine, so written down, yeah. And then my brother read it in a completely different way that I wrote it. And I was going, I was writing. So it was painful on so many reasons, but the end result was catharsis, which is what it is about. There you go, I'll shut up now.
Wow, DLJ, that was amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I mean, the more I think about it, it's like I actually do a lot of writing, and I spend a lot of time doing metaphors and stuff like that. So it's kind of like free form poetry. I don't know whether there is a sharp distinction between poetry and other kind of expression. I think it's a question, because the kind of things that you're talking about, okay, are you reading it correctly? Are you putting all of that actually matters? And it's like, so it's very interesting, really, really fascinating. Thank you, DLJ. Next up is Jyoti, followed by Brian. Jyoti.
Oh, sorry, I have some of my dinner in my mouth. What I wanted to say, and you just mentioned the metaphor aspect of it, is that many, many centuries ago, tradition was passed on from one generation to another in a very oral form, in stories or myths. And those myths are interpreted. They're not facts. So there's I think poems in a way, and poems and music, as you said, they're words. However, the interpretation is every single person's own. So I feel like they're the metaphor of passing things down into the next generation continues, but in a different, succinct form. It reminds me a lot about, the stories that we all grew up in, with religious stories or whatever, which these days we don't find for our children. Anyhow, that's my 2 cents.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jyoti. I mean, this is an amazing, amazing conversation, because each person is adding so many different angles. Jyoti added the angle of the stories and tradition, because this is kind of part of who we are as human beings. This is the way in which culture is transmitted. Stories are very much in the same kind of category as this, as poems. Next up is Brian, Steve, Jeff, and Evanique. Brian.
Okay, just before I start, today I spent a couple of hours on the Scribe or Hyper book, looking at the 3 sections that are there. I think this is going to quadruple the value that I get from 52. It is really superb having this available.
Which of the 3? I have 3 Scribal Hyper books. Which one did you look at?
All 3.
Okay.
I spent most time looking at the. I spent most time going back over the thing on the digital stuff that we did.
Yes, I mean that is the most the largest one right now, because I just got done with it today. So it's like it's what I have. So folks, Brian, sorry for the interruption. Let me just give a context to people. So what we're doing, for example, the one that I'm putting most effort in, or not the most effort has been put in, is the one on the digital, basically digital and religion. So what we have, the meetup just took place yesterday, and what we have is we have a video. The way we are doing it is that we are building the structure right in the beginning. So we are dividing the meetup by questions. So there are like 8 questions that were dealt with. Each has a slide. Okay, so the slides are there. The videos are divided, so you can just scroll in YouTube and you can jump to any of the questions. You can also click and it takes you to the questions. So for each of the slides, there is a question and all the bullet points made there. After which there is a bibliography, full bibliography of all kinds of references for each section. After that, Peter Berkman has lecture notes, which are incredible lecture notes, which are there. So it's like, and then, there is an invitation to ask questions. And we are going to take those questions and put that into the next meetup we're going to do 1 week from now. And all those slides were presented beforehand, were there like 3-4 days before the meetup. So people could look at all the questions, think about them themselves, look at the bullet points, have some idea what kind of things would be said about it, come prepared for it, maybe do your own research, and all the work that is being done. And the same thing for the Scribal Hyper book for this one. All the poems, Marissa prepares a list of all the poems. So all the links to the poems are there. You get to listen to the poems, you get to read them, and we'll put more things in it. The Scribal Hyper book we're doing for Aquinas is also like that. Brian, go ahead. Sorry about the interruption. Go ahead.
That's okay. I was also going to say that I went through the questions on the Aquinas on John Juan, and it was, it was eight pages I went through there, and it did everything for me except make me understand what hell it was about. It's very, very difficult to understand that part. Anyway, back to poetry. Really, a few questions I had. basically what it is for. People have spoke about how they use it and what it's for. But I find there are three main things that I get out of it, or it can be used for. What you can actually use it for journaling. And in addition to that, I use it as a memoir. So I have whole groups of poems that I put together of things that, for example, I've done a sort of a list or a number of poems that relate to my early childhood, and wrote a poem about each event that I could remember. So as a memoir, I use it there. But I also find you can use it as a meditation. It's very powerful if you do it that way. The other thing is that I mention it here is also I've been writing poetry for most of my life at the rate of about 2 poems a year. Over the past 4 years, I've written poems about 1 a day, 2 a day, something like that. What I've been doing is because I wanted to find an outlet for my creativity, I've been doing an awful lot of painting, which was very helpful, but the poetry was even more helpful. But I did it in groups. I found groups on the internet where they provide a theme and you can write a poem and then everyone shares the poems and critiques them. That's been very valuable to me, and I've got a lot of pleasure out of that. The other thing is, as part of that, I have a special friend who we share when we're both in the same groups, and we will each write a poem and share it before we submit it, so we don't feel as we're going to be totally left out when we produce something, which has never happened, thankfully. What do I get from it? I get it's a release from me. I get release from the stress. I can see that I can build on creativity, and I can see that being very beneficial. I get relaxation from it. It's to just to be able to sit and write poems is an incredible release. And finally, I think relevance in that it makes me feel relevant to the world. You know, I can take a subject, take a topic, and I can put my thoughts down on paper, and see where I fit in with it. So I know what I think about things. It just makes me feel more relevant to do it. I think that's all I wanted to cover.
Wonderful, Brian. That was amazing. That was amazing. So a few thoughts. I mean, one is that, look, this format, which is there, that we are developing here for the poetries, is very flexible. And I'm just delighted to see so many people who are writing poetry, because I think that has even more legs than just reading poetry. Because if you are actually making art, that's great. So I'm open to doing more of that. Also the Harper book, I want, if we can put, for example, if you want to put some poetry up there, you're welcome to do that. So I'm looking at kind of collaboration and just think of how we can build this, because in the 52 Living Ideas, we already have a group of people who are committed to learning and growing and expressing. This is a different medium, in a different topic of poetry and what we can do with it. So please think ambitiously about what can be done through this medium. And I'm happy to do that with a combination of an online component, a written component, and oral component. We can go back and forth. And Marissa has a lot of experience with this. So even if I am dumb about things, she may be able to correct me. It's possible that she will notice something I don't. So let's work on this and see. I'm seeing just a lot of upside here. Next up is going to be Steve, followed by Jeff. Steve.
Yes, as far as my creative process, I kind of view it as alchemy of taking war. People have written poems about war, the current war, whether it be a loss, a death, a breakup, a heartbreak, and transforming that experience and transcending it and making it into something beautiful, something that you process. And as Brian said, it's such a release. It just helps me release. And I guess that's the catharsis of releasing those sad emotions and being able to transcend them. So that's what the creative process is like for me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. I really like your term alchemy, because it is all about, like, most people are stuck in their habitual world, keeping on doing what they are doing, keeping on feeling what they are feeling. What this does, what art does at its best, is that it gives you a lever that you can use to radically transform how you're feeling. I mean, the art that I know best is music, like Indian classical music. I can do that. Like within seconds, I can completely transform how I'm feeling using art. And this is especially true if you are making it. So thank you. Next up is Jeff, followed by Evanique. Jeff.
Well, Marissa, I actually had an experience of a 6-day poetry writing workshop once, where there were about 20 of us, and we went back and forth every single day between writing and then the next day reading. I mean, a poem that we had written, and that was kind of like Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And on Tuesday and Thursday, we were paired with another person and given prompts. So we actually had to write and read a poem every single day for 5 days. And, and it was great. It really sort of got you in the habit of just do it, don't obsess, But I would say, given the stress that it caused me for some of the time in doing that we should also consider just sending you to a breakout room with some prompts and asking you to write a poem during our session, and then you could come back and read it. No, I'm just kidding. But it was a wonderful experience, and so you're absolutely right that getting people over the inertia so that you can then just do it and read it. It's not going to be perfect. It's just going to be whatever we come up with. Was a great way to get over the fear of it not being good enough.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Next up is Evanique.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to speak to, Shrikant, when you were talking about the meetup beforehand, and I was thinking, like, why does religious text have such an impact, right? And not only is it the words, but it's the style. And, when most people quote religious texts, they're poems and it's poetry, and that's why it speaks. Like in the Bible, it's Psalms, it's Proverbs. Like Proverbs and Psalms are poems, right? They're just basically poems. And I think they speak to people's souls. And I think that's what poetry does in general. You don't know why it has an impact on you that it does. And you can see with the dial are all poems in some way, shape, or form. It's poetry in motion almost. And that has the impact that it has because of its poetic nature. And I think, again, because it speaks to soul. And the Bhagavad Gita is, it's not a poem, but it's very poetic, right? The flow of the verses, how, and you said it's sung, right? It's sung, it's normally sung to music. So when you hear it, it is a form of poetry. And I think that's why people get impacted by it, because it does speak to the soul. And, the Bible is the perfect sample. When you give people rules and rules and rules and rules, nobody cares. Nobody wants to follow that. That just bogs down, and you just get bogged down in that, in the rules. But when you talk to people using poetry, which is why I think John in general has a greater impact, is because it like people have described it as poetic. Like his writing has a very poetic flow. And I think that is what brings the impact. And you can hear it from people who write it on this meetup and people who listen to it. So I think that's the beauty of it. And that's the purpose of it, is to just speak to the soul, or to be an expression of the soul of the person writing.
All right. I wanted to give you an example of, because you made this connection between religion and poetry. So I want to give you, I didn't get to share a poem, so I'll go ahead and do that. And how I want to give you an example. This is from Naneshwari. This is Naneshwar, who he's the contemporary of Aquinas, and we are using his commentary to understand Bhagavad Gita. And what he does is that he expresses these really philosophical concepts in metaphors. So this is one of his Abhangas, one of very short poem. So it goes like this: Mogara fulala, Mogara fulala. So what it's saying is that Mogara is this fragrant flower, and it is such an amazing flower. The smell is so amazing. This happens in tropics. There isn't an equivalent in the temperate region, but the smell is so amazing that you can, you can smell it for like blocks, and people will flock. People will change their course of walking in order to come. So it's Mogara fulala, Mogara fulala. Phule phule vechita baharu kariyansi ala. Phule vechita baharu means by the time I collect the flowers that have flowered, the buds have produced more flowers. So he is describing this state inside the consciousness where you are, it's this kind of bliss where by the time you experience it, there is more bliss bubbling up. Okay. Ibale seropa laviale dari. So I've planted such a small, tiny sapling in my garden. Dayasa velu gela gagana vegi. So its tree has grown right to the sky. So this is the idea that Atma, if you focus on the core of you, that is the same. And if you really focus on the core of you, you are able to relate to all of nature and to everything. So that's an example of very, very simple kind of poetry, capturing something which is a very, very complex philosophical point. So, all right, who'd like to go next? So I think this, this meetup has tremendous legs, and I want to see what we can do. If there is, Marissa, what do you think? Do you think we can produce something which is where people can share their poetry, talk about writing poetry?
I think we're off to an amazing start so far. I mean, this is only the second time, and we already had such great contributions here. I think it's great. I would like to say, for anyone who did read a personal poem, feel free to send me the lyrics. I'm actually, the first gentleman, he left so quickly, I didn't get a chance to catch him, and that makes me very sad. But anyone else, if you don't want to post it here, send it to me. What I'll probably do is I'll if you have a link, send me the, because if you don't want anyone to be able to change it or edit it, you can just send me a link if you have it published somewhere. And if not, if you want to send me the lyrics, what I can do is I can put it into a PDF inside Google Docs and then just provide it as the link so that people can view it and still not edit it in case folks worry about it being changed or anything. But I think this is amazing. It's just so beautiful. This is such a, I'm so excited about this. I'm looking forward to seeing how it naturally evolves and grows here together.
Yep. Paul, go ahead.
Shrikant, thanks for adding, you added another dimension. I don't know if it's called, you sang. So you added a whole new dimension just now. Thank you. So it reminded me of when one of the guys was talking about inspiration and going to church for the first time, but the hymns, like the hymn, how can I keep from singing? Like maybe we can add things like that to this as well. You started us on that track. So
absolutely. And to get Mike A involved, one of my favorite things is I like improv, and one of my favorite things is musical improv. So that means you just go on the stage and you create not just improv, but musical improv. So you are creating poetry, creating songs on the fly, coming up with your tunes for it, and you're singing and you're going back and forth. There is a place here in New York that does it really, really well, amazingly well. So it is, this is relating to Steve. So there are people who do things like completely on the fly. I mean, it's just incredible to watch them. They're very, very good. There is a secret though, I found out. The secret is that the person who plays piano is really good. So what he does is that he provides the background music. So it provides some kind of a tune, kind of a suggestion of a tune, which is appropriate to the scene that they're doing. And then people just jump in and start doing it. So wonderful. Next up is going to be Paul. Oh no, Paul is already done. Margarita, followed by Mike. Margarita.
Yes, I have a question. I think I like the idea that we can collect poems that we like and also poems that we created, perhaps. I wonder whether I can submit also in Bahasa. I try to also make the translation in English, but sometimes, Shrikant, the language feeling is more in my mother tongues. Yeah.
Sure. You can always do that. But the other thing is that, we're talking about music, right? The thing is that poetry is musical. And even the sounds are so beautiful. Whenever you've recited the Dao De Jing poems, I always, it's always amazing because it's the sound which is added to it. So you're always welcome. Thank you. Next up is Mike.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on your improv idea. I have to admit that when you were singing the poem, I was actually improvising a story about someone who opened a dozen eggs and only found 11. And as you spoke the next verse, I was talking about this poor chicken who got shortchanged. Just as a suggestion at some point, being that there are people here that are bi and trilingual, is that you may have somebody kind of read a poem in a language that you don't understand. And when they're done with the verse, you can actually speak in English or in another language and try to just translate whatever it is that comes. And obviously you don't need to be funny because improvisation is not always comedic, right? But it's a way to go, maybe just by their intonation or their tone, if you can pull the expression and just see if you have, you want to go on the fly and try to kind of write what they're saying.
Just for the information of people who do not know, Mike speaks 7 different languages, none of which he understands.
That is so true.
So it's possible, folks. So all right, All right, so this is so delightful. And Marissa, thank you so much for, for heading this one. I think this is kind of, I feel that it has a life of its own, and it's going to develop in some very, very interesting directions. And it's going to add a richness to what we do at 52 Living Ideas along different dimensions. And folks, feel free to, like, you're all invited to contribute as much as you would like. You can write to me at 52 Living Ideas. You can message me on Meetup. You can do the same for Marissa. You can go ahead and message any ideas that you have, and we will figure out something. Don't worry if you don't know how to make it work, or if you, there's a lot of things that can be done. Also think in terms of how it will go, how it interacts with the written, because written and oral, it's a very powerful combination that has really shaped the culture. The civilization is based on this, of being able to speak well and being able to convert it into writing. And then that produces further next level of effects. All right. Thank you very much.
Can I just say one thing, Shrikant?
Yes,
I'm
go ahead.
out of line. I just wanted to also say that, there's a lot of like read, write, but everything is about connection, how we connect to each other as human beings. So that comes out very powerfully in 52 Living Ideas, and also in this particular Zoom. Thank you so much, both of you.
No, thank you. Absolutely. I mean, actually, when you talk about oral, right, you're really talking about conversation with people and people connecting to each other through words, because here, you can see the personalities. You can see, individual characters. You can see the, body movement. You can see the tone of the voice, and all of that is being carried through. So, and then, but what writing does is that, you see, writing provides a level of richness. Like, for example, today we are going through Aquinas. Today we read so many poems. These were written, and they're like these little bombs, that go into our consciousness and explode, and they create something completely new and completely unexpected. So it's a very powerful combination. All right. Thank you very much, folks. See you soon. Bye.